All right. Looks like we're ready to start. Good afternoon, everyone. I am excited to welcome you all to this wonderful alumni program, a live podcast with our very own class of 22 graduate, Akeem Earle, and a friend to the law school, supporter of the UDC Law mission and its students, the District of Columbia's Attorney General, Mr. Brian Schwalb. I know many of the faces in the room, but for those who do not know me, I am Twinette Johnson, and I have the best job in the world. I proudly serve as the Dean of the University of the District of Columbia David A. Clark School of Law. For the past 50 years, UDC Law has provided a legal education that marries theory with practice and that sets our graduates on the path to becoming successful advocates. We believe that our students' justice-minded perspective, wherever they practice law, improves our profession and ultimately our world. And there's no clearer evidence of that than our alumni, Akeem Earle. Akeem, who's originally from Brooklyn, New York, came to UDC Law determined and vowed to use his law degree to promote greater inclusion and diversity in the legal profession. Akeem is the recipient of the Judge Pryor Legacy Award and currently serves as a Charles F. C. Ruff Fellow in the Criminal Division at the Office of the Attorney General. He is also a loving husband to UDC Law Class of 21 alumna Tone Earle and proud dog dad to Mamba. Through his podcast, Akeem seeks to inspire and promote inclusivity in and accessibility to the legal profession. And as you can see, Akeem is already filling our 3 pillars. He is committed to the practice of law, committed to promoting justice, and in doing so is undoubtedly changing lives, and we could not be prouder of him. Please join me in welcoming Akeem and Attorney General Brian Schwalb, who Akeem has the honor of introducing.
Thank you, Dean Johnson. I appreciate it. Welcome, guys, to the Conversate podcast. I'm your host, Akeem D. Earle. Welcome. This is the first live podcast of Conversate, and I'm excited to be here. And I'm even more excited that it's at my alma mater. UDC Law is very special to me. For those of you who do tune in every week for the Conversate podcast, you know how this goes. For you guys who don't know, Conversate is where I interview lawyers. I get to know who they are inside and outside of the courtroom. And I always say that this podcast is for the layperson, law students, and baby lawyers, is to inspire them, to educate them, and to entertain them. And that's what we're going to do here today. For my next guest, he is a third-generation Washingtonian. He's an undergrad from Duke University, and afterwards he went on to Harvard Law School. After he graduated Harvard Law School, he went on to participate in the honors program at the Department of Justice, and then on to Venable, a law firm right here in DC. He's a husband, he is a father, and he also happens to be the Attorney General for the District of Columbia. Please help me welcome in AG Brian Schwalb.
Thank you, Akeem. Very generous introduction.
Of course. Thank you for being here. So the official Conversate opening question is, if I was not an attorney, I would be a what?
Yeah, so you spoiler alerted a little bit, everybody, but I'd be the head basketball coach at Duke University.
You would take Coach K's job.
Well, Coach K left.
Coach K's left, he did.
You talk about, following a legend.
Yeah.
I talk a little bit about being the second elected Attorney General, and the first elected Attorney General, Carl Racine, was a little bit like Coach K. And so as I was coming into this role, I'd ask people, how many people know the name Gene Bartow? And nobody would raise their hand. Who's Gene Bartow? And Gene Bartow was the basketball coach at UCLA that came after John Wooden.
Okay.
After John Wooden won all those national championships, you got a guy named Gene Bartow. Now, Gene Bartow was a great basketball coach, but nobody remembers him. So I said, what are people going to say about Brian Schwalb following Carl Racine? They're not going to remember, right? So Coach K obviously was that kind of great presence at Duke. But, the question of, what I would do, I love being a lawyer. So that question pushes me a little bit into an uncomfortable place because there aren't a lot of things I could say that I could see myself doing. But I love working with young people. I love teaching, motivating, and I love college basketball.
Yeah.
And so you can put those things together. Anytime you can find something that there's a passion in the day-to-day,
Right.
but also the mission is something that you love, it's a good place to toil.
No, that's real. Did you play basketball at all?
I played basketball as a kid,
bit?
coming up into high school. I was one of those athletes that peaked in junior high, so I got a little worse over time. It was downhill after that.
Okay.
A couple sports I was able to hold on through high school and into college, but basketball pretty much peaked in 10th grade.
Okay, so you couldn't be a basketball coach. What made you fall in love with the law? What made you want to do this profession?
So I kind of grew up around lawyers. My dad was a great trial lawyer. His father was a general practitioner.
Okay.
So law was kind of in the blood. And then, sort of a recognition that some of the skill sets associated with being a lawyer resonated with my personality. I never liked bullies. I could kind of, as I was a good athlete, I was bigger and stronger than other kids. And so when I saw other big and strong kids like picking on people, that angered me.
Yeah.
And I learned that one of the great things about being a lawyer is you get to stand up for people.
Yeah.
I like to argue. I like to I like to marshal arguments and get into issues. So over time, it just continued to reinforce the things that I like doing.
No, that's awesome. So I'm going to start from where you are now and then work our way backwards. So you're the Attorney General for the District of Columbia. What is an Attorney General? Just define what that role is.
Such a great question, and one that I found that too few people really understand what we do. I think over time people understand there is an Attorney General.
Right.
And then because the District of Columbia took a major step forward in 2014 in being able to elect an Attorney General,
right,
people started to know a little bit more about the office. But when you really get down to what we do every day in the office, we can't talk about that enough. So the Attorney General of the District of Columbia is the chief law officer of the city. We have three primary obligations under our jurisdiction. First is we defend the District of Columbia like any lawyer or law firm would do when the city gets sued, when the city needs legal advice, when transactional contracts and eminent domain and tax and all of that bond work has to get done. The lawyers who represent the District of Columbia are Office of Attorney General lawyers. When the District of Columbia gets sued because there's an auto accident or a slip and fall, or when the District of Columbia gets sued because our laws are being challenged under the Second Amendment, our gun laws and other things, all of that defensive work is done. So the law office of the city is sort of bucket number one. Bucket number two is we're the chief juvenile justice prosecutors. As you know, where you're serving in our public safety division, that's where our criminal prosecutors are housed, and we are primarily doing juvenile criminal prosecution. We also have some misdemeanor authority over adult crimes. So we're a prosecutor's office in addition to a civil defense-oriented law firm. And then we are also representing the city's public interest. And where I sort of put the public interest is we defend the Child and Family Services Agency, so abuse and neglect cases and foster care cases. We have child support enforcement. And we also bring affirmative lawsuits and investigations to protect the environment, protect consumers, protect seniors, protect tenants. That kind of large bucket of obligation for an attorney general in terms of advancing the public interest. So I think in terms of describing that at a general level, it's defensive litigation, it's prosecution of criminal, and it's advancing the public interest.
Awesome. Do you take on cases yourself? Do you still practice at all or not?
I missed that. I was a trial lawyer for a lot of years, and I knew that if I were fortunate enough to get elected, that'd be something that I'll look for the right, maybe appellate case or something that I can get engaged in. I still am, engaged in the cases. In fact, some of the people on my senior team say, hey, boss, we need you to be a little bit higher up. And I still get into the weeds on things, which I love. But no, I'm not handling cases anymore.
Okay. So you did speak about you being the second elected Attorney General. Does that have any significance to you? Because beforehand, all the Attorney Generals were appointed by the mayor, and like you said, Conversate was the first elected, and now you're the second. Does that hold any significance to you?
Well, it's huge. I mean, on a lot of levels, the difference between having an appointed Attorney General and an elected Attorney General is a game changer for the residents of the District of Columbia. it's a game changer for making sure that government gets better and that we have checks and balances and that we have a system where, my boss is not the mayor. My boss is the residents of the District of Columbia. And that changes the dynamic in small and large ways all the time. So being elected is important. Being the second elected is important too from a couple of perspectives. One is I'm glad I'm the second elected. The first elected Attorney General had to do a lot of work in terms of establishing the way the office was going to work. Figuring out how were we going to navigate in a system where you had a mayoral control for forever, and that was before there was home rule, and even certainly after home rule. There were 50 attorneys general before Carl Racine. They were called Corporation Counsel, and then the name changed, but you had 25 appointed Corporation Counsel before Home Rule in 1973, and then we had 25 afterwards. So,
can you break down Home Rule real quick? What's Home Rule?
So Home Rule was a statute that Congress passed in 1973, kind of at the end of the Civil Rights Movement, which said we got to allow local autonomy to be in the hands of the elected officials in the District of Columbia. There was a 3-person commission from Reconstruction all the way to 1973 that made all decisions for the District of Columbia, and those commissioners were appointed by Senate. And so you had people who didn't necessarily live in the District of Columbia. You had mostly white men appointed, oftentimes Southern white guys who were appointed from a political largesse, said, hey, you want to be a commissioner of D.C.? So it was a big deal for the District of Columbia to get a chance to have a little bit of local control, but Home Rule was never full statehood. So we still have this very awkward relationship with the federal government, which we could talk about if you want to. But so having being the second elected Attorney General meant that I don't have to fight all those fights, do all that like foundational work that A.G. Racine and his team had to do, certainly in their first term, which means that I come in, I got a great team, I got a great machine. My job is to build on it, to make it better. And so I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm a temporary steward of this office. And for however long I choose to do it and the voters want me to do it, but it's going to be temporary. It's not permanent. And I don't care so much whether people remember the name of the second elected Attorney General. I want them to know that, it's the finest law firm in the country. It's doing the most important work in the country, best talent, and making a difference in people's lives. And so the first Attorney General set the framework for us. And now the second and whoever comes after me, we've got to just raise our game.
Got you. So now I do want to take it back to the Duke University days. So, and obviously at Duke, you knew you wanted to be a lawyer. That was the plan all throughout?
Pretty much. I was a philosophy and political science major.
Okay.
I was always struggling with math and science, and I kind of was a liberal arts person. I loved history. I liked reading. I liked reading philosophy. So I pretty much knew early on that it was likely that law was, unless something took me off that path, I was going to be on the law path. Got you.
And was Harvard the ultimate goal? Was that always your first choice? Or?
You probably don't articulate that because it's it's a reach, and but you want to play in the highest level. You want to play. You want to be surrounded by people who are going to push you, and so I applied, and when I got in, it's hard to say no.
Yeah. How was that experience being at Harvard?
From an intellectual point of view, intellectual stimulation, unparalleled. My classmates there, I learned more from my classmates than I did from the professors, and I had great professors, Lawrence Tribe and Charles Ogletree and Alan Dershowitz and, Elena Kagan, Justice Kagan. Then we mentioned before, I was a year behind President Obama.
Right.
And so, it was a high-powered place in terms of intellect, but the classmates, the conversations with classmates and the back and forth, that's where you really honed it. Now, so that intellectual stimulation was great. It was a tough time politically. It reminds me a lot of the divisiveness that we're experiencing right now as a country. It was a very divisive law school community, conservative and liberal. And so it was the very beginning of the Federalist Society. It was generally a liberal student body, but the conversations were hyper-partisan, divisive, and that made it less pleasant to be there. I understand that when Justice Kagan was dean, she did a great job of kind of making the community of the law school much better and taking it down. Our country could learn a lot from that in terms of taking down the level of vitriol, because we didn't do a good job of learning how to disagree without being disagreeable. There was a lot of disagreement going on.
Yeah.
But it sharpens your mind, and you start seeing the very best arguments that are being made on the other side of an argument. That helps you learn how to, I better sharpen my arguments.
Yeah. So how did that translate to you practicing as an attorney? Like, did you find that being in law school is a completely different field than actually practicing? Like, how did you?
Well, I also knew kind of at a young point that I wanted to be a trial lawyer.
Yeah.
So after I got through first year of law school, I spent most of my time at the Legal Aid Bureau, which was the on-campus legal clinic. And so I was in the Boston Housing Court and the Boston Small Claims Court and Middlesex County, just trying landlord-tenant cases and benefit cases, trying to get as many bats that I could. You want to get your at bats, and so I knew I wanted to be outside the classroom, and the client relationships were important, but I was also really interested in learning how to be a trial lawyer.
Right. And so is that what made you apply for the honors program at DOJ?
Yeah, I in between graduating and joining the Justice Department, I had a clerkship with a federal trial judge. So I knew that if I could get a clerkship with a trial judge, and even though a lot of my classmates were applying for appellate clerkships, which are great, I knew I wanted to really see what it was like to be, at the trial level. So I was fortunate enough to get a clerkship with federal district court judge in Baltimore, and had a 2-year clerkship before I went to justice. Yeah. But all of that was really being driven by, I wanted to learn how to be a great trial lawyer. I wanted to be around great trial lawyers. I wanted to see what it was from the perspective of a trial court. And then at justice, get out there and learn how to get on my feet and do it.
Yeah. Can you speak about your clerkship experience? Because I know for a lot of law students, that's part of their plan to do a clerkship.
Yeah.
What was the importance of that experience?
Well, there's a lot of value. I mean, so much of what we do in this profession is relationships, and anytime you can have a mentor, a relationship, and most judges see their relationships with their clerks as a mentoring, you get a good perspective on the law from somebody who's been at it for a long time. And I worked for a judge named John Hargrove, who was, I loved him. He was a great man. His experience in the law was very different than the way I came up, and I learned a lot from him, more about, being a human being and what justice really means than the practice of law. And so those lessons are invaluable. Yeah. Then you sit in court and you watch good lawyers and not so good lawyers, and you go back in chambers and talk about, that worked, that didn't work. You see how decisions get made. You see how to be an effective advocate. So it was a great, great learning experience. I would recommend anybody who thinks that they'd be interested in that to apply for a clerkship. Yeah.
And then, so after that, you went to the Department of Justice in the Criminal Tax Division. How was that experience?
Again, wonderful, wonderful experience. I liked the idea of going to the tax division, not because I thought I wanted to do tax law. In fact, I took one tax class in law school. Yeah. Third year, I think I took basic income tax, which I surprisingly liked a lot more than I thought. Again, it's like so much about the law. You don't know that you're going to love it until you get in there and you find there's something intellectually stimulating. And, taxes touch every aspect of society. What do they say? Death and taxes. Those are the only thing that are, guaranteed. So I learned a lot. But the great thing about the tax division was the IRS is your principal agency client, and there's all kinds of controversy that the tax code generates. And as a result, you got to figure out how do you tell stories and persuade judges and juries about complicated, different issues. And there are a lot of them, which means as a young lawyer, you're going to get a chance to, all right, you go try that jury case, you know, and some of the other high profile work at the Justice Department, these massive cases, they take years and years and years. And if you're the junior person on that team, you may not get that at bat. So I like the idea of getting in and getting a place where I'd probably get a lot of intellectual stimulation and a lot of chance to get on my feet. So, I showed up there, and probably week number 2, the assistant director of the section I was in was like, tossed a file across the desk and said, going down to Knoxville and try this case. I said, well, anybody going with me? What do you mean? And they said, nope, go do it. I said, I don't know what I'm doing. He said, well, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And
this was the tax code. Like,
this
is crazy.
So you know what you do when that happens. You don't sleep for 2 weeks, and you learn it, and you study it, and you work, and then you go down there and you do your best.
Got you. So I want to take it back a little bit more.
Yeah.
Give me a bar exam horror story. You finished Harvard Law School. You're going to take the bar. What's something that went wrong, either while you were studying or on the actual exam?
Yeah, it's funny. That's when you're feeling really a lot of stress around, and I remember it was about 4 weeks out from the exam, and I had been putting the time in, but not really putting the time in. It's a couple hours a day. It's 4 weeks out, and I'd been studying, and it's maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. But I just finished law school, and it's summertime, and
enjoy yourself.
So the exam was end of July, so it was probably middle of June. I was like, I better start focusing on this. And
do not follow this study plan. I want to make sure that we know for the law students.
I'm not recommending. Everybody knows how they get motivated.
Right.
So I was going to take the Virginia bar. My strategy was I'd come back, I'd take the Virginia bar exam, and I would waive into the District of Columbia. And so I'd take one exam, but I'd get two. I'd be licensed to practice in 2 jurisdictions. Awesome, So, of course, you want to like, oh, man, am I going to fail this? And not only is that going to be terribly embarrassing, but I'm going to have to do it again. But, that fear is, you just got to channel that to make it motivate you. The great thing about the Virginia exam, first let me tell you about the bad thing. The bad thing about the Virginia bar exam is you have to take it in a coat and tie.
Yes.
And I was down in Roanoke in July, and it's hot, and you're in a coat and tie taking a 2-day exam. But the good thing about the exam is, other than the multi-state, you got essay exams on day 2, 10 essays. And you basically learn, like, you can fudge your way through an essay. What are the issues? I spot these issues. This is the tension. Now, I may not know what the answer is, but I've demonstrated that I know how to think through the problem. And so I may not get a 10 out of 10 on the exam, but they'll give me a 6, 7. I can work my way through an exam. That multi-state, it's right or wrong. It's multiple choice. So. So it went fine, but my buddies who like to joke around a little bit, they started a rumor. I was down in Roanoke, and the rumor got started that I slept through the first day of the exam.
Wow.
So that was a rumor.
Just because they just started.
They just decided they were going to start this rumor. Like, Schwalb's down in Roanoke, he slept through the first day. Can you believe it?
Let's have some fun.
So DC is a small place. I can't tell you, for like a year after I passed the bar exam, people come, didn't you sleep through the first day? Like, we heard you slept through the first day of the exam. So I didn't have a real nightmare, but had that rumor been true, that would have been a nightmare.
Man.
So
that was the horror story. Did you like dispel the rumor? Like, you tell them, like, no, I didn't.
It depended on the audience. Sometimes, sometimes you want to play that up.
I did, and I still passed.
I rushed through. I got in only half day the first day. I slept late, but man, I killed the second day, and I'm good. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
No,
so but I got there on time both days.
Yeah, you finished.
I did fine. It's like everything else. It's scarier than the reality. You put the time in, you'll be ready to do it and deliver.
Yeah, that's real.
Yeah.
So you spoke about growing up in Washington, D.C., being the third Washingtonian. Can you explain what that is? What's the third Washingtonian?
Well, third generation Washingtonian was, my grandfather on my mother's side, my maternal grandfather's family moved to the District of Columbia from Eastern Europe, coming to the United States for the reason a lot of people immigrate to the United States. They wanted economic opportunity and some religious freedom. I'm Jewish, and my family, in Eastern Europe. This is before the Holocaust, but end of the 1800s wasn't a hospitable place for Jews to live. So came to the United States. My grandfather's family came here to D.C., and he was a first-generation American and a first-generation Washingtonian. Lived down at 5th and F, so Northwest, so where the courts are now, and Judiciary Square. They had a little house there. My grandfather put himself through school and became a doctor, and we had a family legend about him, which was that he played the violin to put himself through med school.
Wow.
So the problem is that by the time I got old enough to test whether that was true, my grandfather was dead. So we're running with it. Like, nobody can disprove that story now. But
it must have been good to put him through med school. Yeah.
He was a good musician. I do remember him telling me when I was growing up, because they lived here, and we'd see them every weekend. And he would talk about swimming in the Anacostia River when he was growing up.
Wow.
I was like,
cleaner
Grandpa,
back then,
Grandpa, come on. I was like, nobody swims in that river, right? But look, we're getting back to a point where maybe it's going to be clean enough.
Yeah,
Depending on the storms and things. I saw that end of September there's an Anacostia swim day scheduled. So we're kind of coming full circle on that.
Right.
My mother was born here in D.C. and she moved. She kind of moved around when they were coming up as they were becoming more affluent. They lived in Mount Pleasant for a while, lived over on Colorado Avenue, lived on Park Road, and then moved over just west of the park down where Oregon Avenue and Nebraska Avenue come together.
Okay.
And that's where my grandparents lived, and I would remember, spending time there on the weekends. So I was born at Washington Hospital Center. My folks, like a lot of white families, Jewish families, after the riots in 1968, moved out of the city and moved to Montgomery County. So I grew up right outside on the other side of the line, and but always felt a tie. My grandparents were here. My mother and her friends were all here. So we spent a lot of time here in Washington growing up. So I think when people say it's interesting, the conversation about who's a Washingtonian, which you learn when you're running for office, particularly as a first-time candidate. People want to know that. And it's such a dynamic place because a lot of people are coming. Washington draws people. You come to be in government. You come to, if you want to play on the biggest stage for public policy or justice or law, you come to D.C. You want to act, you go to Broadway or L.A. You want to make a lot of money, you go to Wall Street. You want to play on the biggest stage of policy and justice, you come to Washington. So you got a lot of people who aren't from here who come and then they fall in love with, is in my unbiased view, the best city in the world to live in. And so Washingtonians can be people who aren't necessarily born here, but there's also a lot of people who were born here, and they take great pride in the fact that. So
I see you even got the tattoo. You got the
I got the flag and the 202. So this is another story that came out recently.
When did you get that?
This is like a sport. What do they call it? It's a scoop.
Okay. Breaking news.
You're breaking news right
on the
now.
Conversate podcast. Only on the Conversate podcast.
Only on Conversate you get a scoop like this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is relatively recent, within the last 2-3 months.
Wow.
So I was trying to figure out. I kind of was looking at the tattoos and realizing that the vast majority of people that are cool and young have tattoos. And I'm cool and young. So, I was like, I gotta get it. And I've got 3 daughters. 2 of the 3 have tattoos. My wife has a tattoo.
Okay.
And so I said, I'm going to get a tattoo. And I got no love from anyone in my. They said, you're not getting a tattoo. And where are you going to get it? And what are you going to do? And so I finally just said, I'm going to get a tattoo. I think the right thing to do is get the DC flag. But I want 202 to be in the stars. I want somehow to represent the area code too.
Nice.
So I went down and got a tattoo, and I showed it to my girls. They're all out of the city. Like, you're faking us. You're punking us. I said, no. It's a Sharpie. My wife came home, started rubbing it. I said, no, it's real. It's real. So, yeah. It's a new addition. I don't have a lot of fans in my house around it yet, but little by little in the community,
Did it hurt?
If anybody wants to respond to this and talk about how cool it is that the AG's I think my daughters will pick it up, and
your cool points for them.
Your
cool points for them. Don't worry.
So
how long did it take?
It was quick. It's quick, and there actually isn't a lot of ink. So they just kind of.
You can shade it in later. Yeah.
I don't know whether I'll shade it or not. But,
Dope. Okay, so taking it back to you finished out at DOJ, you transitioned to private practice. I know that's also people's plans. Also, how was that transition, and what made you do that transition?
So I loved being at the Department of Justice, and I probably wouldn't have left, but for the fact that my wife and I had our oldest daughter, Jess, and were pregnant with our middle daughter, Allie. And I was spending two weeks of every month on the road. And I was missing being home and seeing the girls as much as I wanted to. And then I also was building really great relationships in the different communities where I was trying cases, meeting judges, meeting lawyers. But it wasn't my home. I was never I was assigned mostly to the Southeast, and I had the Middle District of Florida, and I wasn't going to live in Orlando or Jacksonville or Tampa. I wasn't going to live in Atlanta. I tried cases in Alabama and Louisiana, and I loved that experience. But I knew that ultimately I wanted to sink roots and have a professional experience here. So, so that was really the precipitant to leaving public service and Maine Justice. I went to practice law with my dad. My dad had a law firm, great boutique trial firm in town. And it was running into challenges. It was right around the time where big law firms were coming along and kind of swallowing up smaller firms. And so, a group of great lawyers left the firm and went to what was then Piper Marbury, now DLA Piper, one of the biggest firms in the country, in the world maybe. Another group went to King and Spalding. And, my dad said, look, I'm not interested in going to a big law firm at this stage of my career. Why don't you come, leave public service, we'll try some cases, wrap things up, and you can go back to public service, and I'll retire. And, so that was the plan, 6-month plan, went about 7 years.
Wow.
And it was great professional experience and off the chart personal experience. My dad was my best friend and best man at my wedding. And so to be able to do that, was pretty special. Yeah. And then he did finally get to that point where he said he's going to retire. And so he did. And that's when I went to Venable. Nice. So I went to Venable in January 1st, 2005. Yeah.
How was that working with your dad? Was it like a healthy competition type thing, or were you just trying to get to where he was at? Like, how was that working relationship in terms of?
No competition. When you get lucky enough to have a great mentor who has your back and you don't have to worry about competing, when you really have people who when you succeed, they succeed. Yeah. So it was good. And, it's also natural when you think about the age and the energy level, he was, in his mid to late 60s. So, he's happy to say, I don't need to do another deposition. I don't know to go do that hearing. You go do it. And that's what you want as a young lawyer, is you want the opportunity to get in and do it. So, but you also had a really wise guiding, more senior person who can say, hey, think about it this way. Be aware of this, why are you doing it this way, and help kind of refine my skills. So I felt like I had great trial chops coming out of justice, but then how do you raise your game? You were always trying to get better. How do you do it even better than you're doing it? And constant learning. So it was great. It was great personal experience. So I enjoyed it a lot, and it was great, as was my experience at Venable. I thought the very different environment, similar work, similar challenges. Private clients have their own worries and needs and issues, and they're compelling. And I really was fortunate to have clients who I liked a lot. They had their own compelling stories, quirky stories. And so the difference was that, Venable gave me a platform to do a lot of things that a smaller law firm really focused only on trial work didn't let me do. I tell an example where I had a great client who I was representing who was getting sued a fair bit on contract matters, and it was a great litigation client, but his company then got to the point where they were going to go public. And, I don't know anything about taking a company public. If I had been at my small boutique firm, that work would have gone to another firm. But when I was at Venable, I could say, look, let me introduce you to some of my partners who are experts at these different things that happen. And I got to go on that journey with him, which was a life-changing wealth moment for him and his family to see, his company go public. And it allowed me to work very closely with other kinds of lawyers, do different things. I got a chance to see how rewarding it was to do the private practice of law and other specialties. I always had an image that, a lawyer has a briefcase, has a client, and goes to court and stands in front of juries. That's what lawyers do. But lawyers do a lot of really important things and can, do estate planning and tax planning and deal with regulatory issues and governance issues that are really, really important for people. So Venable allowed me to see that as a practitioner and to kind of provide some meaningful, well-rounded legal services for people. And then eventually, in an organization like that, I also got a chance to be a leader in the organization. So I've always loved the business of law and the organizational challenges. How do you recruit and train? How do you lead? Lawyers, law students, legal professionals, we are inherently unleadable. You know, like you can't drag people around and force them to do it. You have to find a way to motivate.
Yeah.
We're skeptical of anybody who's pushing us in a certain direction. So how do you create an environment where you're leading, but you can't do it with the tools that ordinary, you know, it's not like I got a stick and I can, you know, make people do things. So learning how to do that in a law firm is something that was pretty special too. So, and then of course I'm biased, but Venable has been a firm that had a great soul too. And it was committed to pro bono. Probably the most important case I ever tried was a death penalty case in Alabama. I couldn't have done that without a firm that was willing to financially support the investigation and all the work to try that case. It had a big platform in the city in terms of our foundation. We could be engaged in things and in nonprofits. So I really got to a place where like everything was clicking in terms of the private practice of law. I was still trying cases and representing clients, which I love doing, but I had younger lawyers who were coming up. I think I was talking with somebody earlier, like, you know, I don't think I got any older. It's just that everybody around me got younger. And that's what happened at Venable is all of a sudden these, you know, great lawyers were surrounding me and they were 10, 20, 25 years younger, but they were doing great work. And then I could be engaged in the community doing things that were on the nonprofit space or boards and things. And it was great. So I'm a big fan of big law in that sense.
Yeah. What in your mind, what would you choose was a better experience? Public interest work or being in the government or private practice? I know that's a big...
Yeah. So the great thing about that is that, you know, I've had the good fortune of not having to choose that. You know, I'm practicing now for 32 years. And the great thing about the career trajectory is you can do it all. You can do both. Right now, I thought the dean's comments were really, you know, I smiled because I think I have the best job in the city, and when you have a job where you think it's the best job out there, it's pretty special. But I objectively have the best job, and because you know, I get to come to work every day. I love the law, I love being a lawyer, and I love my city. And you know, you bring that together and have the kind of team we have, you know, great lawyers like you, great lawyers in all of our 10 divisions and professionals in our division who bring it every day. You know, that's a great opportunity. So I never thought I'd have to interview with 700,000 people to get a job, right? But now that I got this job, I think I've really got the best job.
Awesome. So now we're going to have a Q&A section.
Okay.
We have some questions from our audience that we're going to have you answer. Thank you, Schwalb. Appreciate it.
I told Akeem, no stumpers. I'll come on, but don't stump me. Don't ask me like some technical legal question.
I like this one. This is a good one. Any advice for law students still discovering what path to take after law school?
Yeah, look, you know, I think that at the beginning of your career in law or anywhere else, there's like a desire to know 100% where you're going and what you're going to do. And it's unrealistic. When you look back on your career, it will look like it's a straight line. Everything made sense. But when you're going forward, there's no straight lines. It's like the branches of a tree. You don't know which branch you're going to be on. So my basic advice for anybody kind of in the first third of their career is surround yourself by smart, interesting people. Build your network, build your assets. And when I say assets, I mean, what do you know how to do really well? What subject matter do you know really well? And what people are you surrounding yourself with who are smart, interesting, and just do that. Commit to that, and opportunities will open up. You know, we all want to be in a place where we, every day we do work that we enjoy doing and that is meaningful. And ideally, you know, that gives us the professional satisfaction we want. But sometimes there's some days where you don't get all three. Some days you go to work and you really like your colleagues, but man, the work is drudgery. Or sometimes you love the work and you love your colleagues, but you're not necessarily making the world a better place. And sometimes you're making the world a better place, but your colleagues are really terrible. And you know, that happens, right? So I guess basically I'd say if you ever get to a place where, you know, you're thinking that you don't have at least one of those three things going on, and you think that, you know, my life is miserable more than half the time, then it's time to think about something new. But at the beginning, just put yourself out there, because windows, you know, open up in places that you can't always predict.
No, that's good. That's real good. I feel like I'm going through that process right now too, of just like in the beginning of my career trying to figure out where to, and those are the things that I'm focusing on too, like what are the skills you can build, what are the people you can build around you. So that's really good, really, really good. The next one is, what is your vision for DC during your tenure as an AG?
So we have three primary sort of mission statements or core mission pillars in the office that we're going to try to use the law to advance. Public safety is the number one issue for us. When people don't feel safe in their city, walking their dogs or pumping gas or doing things, we don't get to all the other things we got to do as a community. So public safety, it drives what we do, but we don't just do it with a lens of criminal prosecuting. My main thing is how do we create healthy, hopeful, independent young people? As a juvenile justice prosecutor, I have a unique standing to talk about what are we doing with young people in our city. And I think it's a public safety strategy. If we create young, healthy, hopeful kids, we're going to be a healthy, hopeful, safer city. If we disregard that, we're not going to be. And so public safety is sort of number one. I want us to be a fairer, safer, healthier city. The second goal is we need to be a city that narrows the equity gaps we've got. And we have an abundance of resources in our city. We're one of the wealthiest cities in the country. And not just financial. I mean, you look at, we're a beautiful city environmentally. We got great history and culture. We've got incredible human talent. So we've got resources that a lot of communities would die to have. But the gap between those who have them and don't, and resources create opportunities. So we got to use the law to make sure that everybody who lives in the District of Columbia, everybody who works in the District of Columbia gets a fair shot. So if we can see some of those huge wealth, income, access to health care, access to healthy food gaps shrink over my administration, that is a goal. And then the third outward-facing mission statement is really how do we protect democracy? How do we fight for statehood? How do we make sure that some of the rights that we think are fundamental rights, that we grew up knowing are fundamental rights, but that are at risk right now, how do we protect them? So I want us to make sure we're a safer, fairer, healthier city. And that's our kids, that's the equity gaps, and that's fighting for democratic principles.
Awesome. Amazing. I think we have one more. Oh, okay, we asked that one already too. What is the worst part of your job, and what is the best part of your job? I like that one.
Yeah, that's good. I think that I don't really think about it at worst and best. It's sort of, there are parts of the job that are really, really important that I may not enjoy as much, but I do recognize there's a lot of bureaucracy that happens in the job, and the bureaucracy is there for a reason. Make sure we're doing things carefully. We've got a lot of taxpayer dollars that we're stewards of. We want to make sure we spend it the right way. Want to make good decisions on personnel and things like that. But we spend a lot of time, on that. That can sometimes be tiresome. But it's important. It's important. The best part of my job, I got so many things I love about the job. I get the most energy when I'm in community and I'm talking to people. We've really tried to lean into our community engagement team because it's making us a better law office. Not just showing up in community and handing out a leaflet, about what we're doing or pushing information out, but really listening to people in community. How can we help? What's going on? What are you seeing? We want to be the most responsive, most professional, most effective agency in the District of Columbia. I think we do that. It's not that we can't get better. But, great lawyers, when people come to them and say they have a problem, those lawyers don't say, hey, we don't do that. Sorry, can't help you. Great lawyers say, let me figure out how I'm going to help you. And the Office of Attorney General is right at the hub. Everything that's happening in the city, we've got our fingers in. So we ought to be those lawyers who can say, hey, how are we going to? And when you see that and you're making a difference in people's lives immediately, small things. We've got a great consumer protection team that mediates consumer cases. And, I heard a story recently, a senior woman called. She had been ripped off of like $400 out of her bank account. And, our consumer protection mediators got on the phone, figured out how to get the bank to put the $400 back in her account. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary moment in terms of making her life a little bit easier. And that happens thousands of times every week. in our office, and I get a charge out of that. A lot of it never gets the highlight or the headlines, but so like I said, I objectively have the best job in the District of Columbia.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. You're doing a great job.
Well, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
We got to actually, I'd like to flip the switch a little bit. I mean, I got you on the stage right now. I mean, you are exactly what is, kind of a poster child for what is great about the office. You were a paralegal as you were trying to figure out, is law school right for me? You were extraordinarily talented. You saw what we were doing in the office every day. You were good at it. Then you said, I'm going to go to law school. Came here to UDC, which is a great law school and getting better, and particularly important law school and feeder for the Office of Attorney General.
For sure.
And then you were a rough fellow. You came back through our honors program. And you're getting, you're doing the important work in our public safety division and doing it well, which is not easy because we got kids in our city who are, at risk and sometimes doing terrible things, and we gotta prosecute those cases. We gotta figure out how we make ourselves safer. And you're still in that exploratory mode, which is totally cool. It's like, we don't ever want to entertain the idea that you might leave, but we also know great lawyers come, they do their time, and they go do something else. And that's part of what institutional excellence at the Office of Attorney General looks like. I want to get done and see thousands of lawyers who go on to do, become Supreme Court justices, go run law firms, go run companies, but they'll come back and say, I was formed as a professional and as a person in the DC Office of Attorney General. I was around great people. And that's what greatness as an institution looks like. It's not that you hold on to your people and they never leave. It's you let them grow. And, we got to spread your story more about it because that's exactly what we want to replicate over and over and over again.
Yeah, and and it's a place to do all those things that you spoke about, to network, to build those relationships, to get that professional experience, to get that child experience, and those are all those things I got from OAG. So
good.
Yeah,
good.
so
Well,
it was
we're
definitely
lucky. DC's lucky.
Thank you, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. So how we close out the podcast is with a closing argument.
All right.
This is where you're on the spot. You have to leave the audience with a gem, with encouragement for law students, baby lawyers, that's the layperson, however you want to do it. But you have to include the word of the day, which is nascent. Include nascent. You can't know the definition. You got to use it the best way you can. Leave the audience with a word of encouragement.
Well, so
to close out the podcast.
So, was it Dr. Nascent who invented basketball?
It's not that I know of. I don't know.
I think it was Dr. Naismith, but
It was Naismith. It was Naismith. Yes. Not nascent. Yes. It was Naismith.
Well, look, the pearl of wisdom. I don't know that I have pearl of wisdom. I would say not only when we're in the nascent stages of what we're doing, something new, because we're always going to be doing something new. I'm doing something new. Is to try to stay curious, try to stay humble. It's really hard, candidly, as lawyers, professionals, to stay humble, and advocates. When you're advocating, you're like, I'm 100% right about this, and I'm going to tell you why I'm right about it, and there is no doubt. And after I get done talking to you, you too will be 100% convinced that I'm right. And so as advocates, as professionals, we start off not necessarily being curious and humble. But stay curious, stay open to the idea that I don't necessarily know the answer to this, or I might get smarter if I listen with an openness and a curiosity, because it will make you a better human being and a better professional, and candidly, it will make you a better citizen. We don't have enough humble curiosity going on in our country right now. We need more of that. We need more of a willingness to actually listen, and listen genuinely to other people with the idea that they actually may have something to teach me. So in your nascent stages and in your stages after nascency, stay humble and curious.
Does anybody know the definition of nascent? You guys want to guess?
We got a definition?
Did he use it right?
Being born, yes.
That's correct. He used it correct. Please get up for AG Schwalb. Everybody Schwalb. Yes, nascent means something new, something to be birthed new, so you use it perfectly. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This was amazing, and I'm sure you left the audience with a lot of gems and a lot of things to think about.
Well, I appreciate people listening, and I appreciate the invitation.
Of course. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.